Genevieve Wood and Fox News contributor Liz Peek. Liz, let me start with you. I don't think the China action was necessarily a surprise, to be quite frank with you. Every bit of the way of this trade war, it's been tit for tat. In fact, they gave a September 1st number and a December 15th number. But I think the markets were concerned because we're barreling toward the point where there won't be anything else to tariff on either side, and you wonder what comes next. And then came the tweets.
Yeah, I think the answer is, Charles, I think you're totally right. This is not so unexpected, but what is the off-ramp? I think everybody wants to know, how can both sides gracefully retreat from this increasing confrontation in such a way that we will have accomplished some objectives? And by the way, we've talked before, I think we already have accomplished some of that in terms of companies moving out of China and China having to respect, the concerns that those companies have. But I think that what we've seen is that the market is responding not just to the Fed these days, even more, it's responsive to the trade war. So it went up a few times over the last couple of weeks when there was positive news. I think this was just taken as, just don't see a resolution.
Genevieve, I know that you're not a fan of the tariffs, and like a lot of people believe the TPP would have been a solution, but that ship has sailed more or less, and now people are trying to handicap what comes next. Are we in uncharted territory?
Well, we are to the extent, look, the president is right to be tough on China. And the reason that so many, especially his supporters, have been appreciative of this is they don't feel that past administrations have. They've let China get away with things and not even with a slap on the hand. So the tough talk is important. But we also need good policy measures, too, for the American people. And look, when you look at the privacy, the piracy problems that we have with China, there is more that we can do there. You can go after individual companies in China, not everybody at once, but individual Chinese companies that are violating these rules and punish them. And we ought to be about doing that. So I think you can talk tough. You can find individual actors to go after, but we do want to continue the talks. And at a certain point, the president will have to decide, look, are American consumers getting hurt too much in this back and forth? And what can I do to protect them while still being tough on China? Mm-hmm. And I think he can do both at the same time.
Liz, so far, we've just gone through all these retail numbers, a lot of earnings reports, and we've heard from companies. We heard from Macy's. We heard from Nordstrom's. Nordstrom saying these tariffs will have an immaterial impact on their business, and Macy's saying they won't be able to pass any cost on. For me, what I'm concerned about is someone who supports fighting back. I think the September 1st tweet, the deadline, the new tweets, the new tariffs were a mistake. And I think this morning's reaction was a mistake. I think President Trump is going to create an issue where the tweets create this market volatility that can spook the consumer who otherwise has a great job, not worried about getting fired, getting the best wage growth in more than a decade, and has been extraordinarily confident to this point.
I think you're absolutely right. As much as we've heard about how consumers are bearing the brunt of these tariffs, it's really hard to find that data, Charles. Not only the retailers are telling us nothing really has affected them, or at least not materially, but also the import prices, the prices of imports coming into the U.S. simply hasn't gone up very much. I think the tweet today, or the directive saying that American companies had to move out of China, whatever the language was, I think that was sort of hasty and not very well considered. The truth is 80% of North American companies are already diversifying their supply chains out of China. That is all happening. President Trump really needs to step back and let some of these issues get resolved by his negotiators and stop putting this all out there on Twitter. I totally agree. The market volatility is a negative. There's just no other way to frame that.
Well, Charles, and I would say, look, I think he ought to be out there on Twitter, but he ought to be tweeting out to Nancy Pelosi and Democrats in Congress saying,
yes,
when you get back, how about this Mexico-Canada trade deal? That's what he ought to be treating on. China is huge, no doubt about it, but it is not our only trading partner. And we need, if we're going to be in a unified front in this war with China on the trade side of things, we need to have our friends in Mexico and Canada and other parts of the world, we need to be solidifying deals with them. So that's where if I were going to say, hey, you want to do some tweeting, let's go after that and get those kind of deals done and then focus on China on the side.
I think that's an absolute slam dunk on that. And they are our biggest trading partners, even more so than China is. So let's put this with the backdrop, too. We started the day off I thought we would have perhaps a crazy session based on what Jay Powell said. Liz, I'm still going through this, and I'm trying to find out exactly where the Fed is. And I started doing more research because they keep referencing 1995, 1998. I also looked at 1994 when they did these. They thought the coast was clear, and they started hiking rates, and it derailed the bond market. They don't have a roadmap. I get that much, but I don't think they're giving us enough clarity. And that's adding to worries and making this market more susceptible, in my mind, for this volatility.
I agree. Some analysts in the last week, in fact, have talked about how forward guidance is almost more important than what they do session to session on rates. We don't have any forward guidance. And I do think Powell's in a tough place in terms of their mandates. If you strictly apply their mandates of low inflation and full employment, we're there. They don't really need to do anything. But last year, they messed up by not taking overseas markets into consideration, overseas economies,
right.
And I think they've done the same thing this year. Powell should have addressed the inversion of the yield curve, in my view, because some of that really does reflect the trillions of dollars they have in portfolio and what they're doing with
right.
that portfolio.
Well,
and he should have been more outspoken about overseas bond markets, in my view.
Yeah, I think he's too cool sometimes, and I understand we don't want him to be panicked, but it's okay, too, to have a greater sense of urgency. Ladies, you are two of the best. I appreciate you helping us to really hash this out. Genevieve and Liz, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, the stock market